The bag hit the sidewalk at 7:43 in the morning. 4 eggs survived, 3 didn't. A head of celery landed under a bicycle tire. 2 apples rolled into a puddle that hadn't existed the night before. The woman standing over it all didn't call out for help, didn't look around. She just stood there with her hands at her sides, the way someone stands when they've stopped expecting strangers to stop. Nadia Washington was already late for the 87 train. She saw the woman from 12 feet away, calculated, the way anyone running behind always does, exactly how much stopping would cost her. Her 8:30 meeting wasn't going to move for anyone. She stopped anyway. She crouched down on a wet Chicago sidewalk in her good work coat and picked up the eggs, the ones still whole, one by one. She didn't know the woman was watching her with the careful, deliberate attention of someone who had been sent specifically to see this. She didn't know a decision about her entire future was being made, quietly and completely in the rain. What she wouldn't know, for 11 more weeks, was that the woman had been sent. And the man who sent her had been waiting a very long time for someone exactly like Nadia Washington to exist. Before we go any further, if you've ever done the right thing when no one was watching, and never found out what it cost you or what it gave you, this story is for you. Stay with us all the way through. Drop a comment right now and tell us where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. We read every single one. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now, because this story has 6 parts, and you don't want to come back to find yourself in the middle. The Worthington Club occupied the 39th floor of a building on North Michigan Avenue that had no signage at street level. That was intentional. Places like this preferred that you already knew where they were before you arrived. The charity gala that Friday had drawn 240 people, architects, managing partners, the kind of money that understood the importance of being seen giving. Tickets were $500. The past appetizers cost more per tray than most people spent on groceries in a week. Someone had ordered white orchids for every table. The room smelled like money trying to smell like flowers. Nadia Washington stood near the east wall with a glass of sparkling water she hadn't asked for, wearing the one blazer in her closet that had cost more than she should have spent. She was there because Blackstone and Callaway had bought 2 tables and expected their associates to fill the seats. The agreement was unspoken but clear: show up, circulate, represent the firm. She had circulated, she had represented. Now she was standing near the east wall. She watched rooms like this the way she had learned to watch them over 3 years at the firm, carefully, quietly, with the particular alertness of someone who understood that in spaces like the Worthington Club, the people who looked most comfortable usually owned the exits. Ji-hoon Kwon came in at 8:17 p.m. She noticed him not because he was handsome, though he was, but because he was wrong for the room in a way that was immediately visible. His suit was charcoal gray, well cut, but without a label worth mentioning. No watch, no pocket square, no one beside him. He moved through the entrance the way a man moves when he has nowhere to be except exactly where he is. Unhurried, unannounced, uninterested in whether anyone had registered his arrival. Most people in that room needed the room to know they had arrived. He didn't seem to need anything. He made his way to the bar at the north window and ordered something she couldn't hear. And that's where it started. Not with raised voices, not with a scene. Just a question, asked a few decibels too loudly by a man who had spent decades never needing to moderate his volume. "Who is this?" Victor Calloway said. Not to Ji-hoon, to the woman from the events team standing 2 feet away, as though the person being discussed could not hear him, as though that was irrelevant. Victor was 54, silver-haired, and possessed of the specific confidence that comes from being told you are impressive for long enough that you stop noticing how you speak to people. He was standing with 3 partners and Marcus Ellis, Nadia's ex, who had arrived with the easy posture of someone whose invitation was never in question. Marcus glanced at Ji-hoon, then back to his whiskey. "Probably a +1 situation," he said. Could check the list. Lightly, as though he were doing someone a favor. The events coordinator began visibly calculating her options. Ji-hoon hadn't moved, hadn't turned around. He picked up his drink, something amber, no ice, and looked out the north window at Michigan Avenue 39 floors below. Nadia set her sparkling water down. She was not the kind of person who looked for confrontations. She was the kind of person who had spent 7 years in law learning precisely which battles were worth having and which would cost her more than they were worth. She had a good internal calculator for these things. It had kept her employed at a firm where she was, more often than not, the only person in a meeting who looked like her. The calculator said, "Leave it." She walked over anyway. "I think there might be some confusion." Calm, even. Looking at Victor the way you look at someone you have chosen to be civil with. This is a ticketed event. If someone's here, they have a ticket. Victor looked at her, the brief, recalibrating look of a man adjusting who he was talking to. "Nadia." The list is with the front desk, she said. If there's a question about a guest, that's who handles it. A small silence opened in the group. Marcus raised one eyebrow. The events coordinator took a half step back. Victor smiled the way men like Victor smile when they've decided to let something go for now. Of course, he said. She turned back toward the east wall. Thank you. She stopped. Ji-hoon was looking at her, not with the grateful relief of someone who had been rescued, with the calm, direct attention of someone who had been watching a person for several minutes and had arrived at a conclusion. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know, she said. Then, because she was genuinely curious, were you on the list? Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Yes, she believed him. So she also believed that was probably not the most interesting thing about him, and that he knew it. Good, she said. They ended up near the north window. Chicago spread below them in amber and white, the grid of it steady and indifferent at this height. Someone had dimmed the lights for the program portion. In the softer light, the event felt like it was receding somewhere behind them. She asked what he did. He said independent financial consulting, the way a person says something true but not complete, and she filed it away without pressing. He asked about her. 3 years and 2 months at the firm, she said. He nodded as though that number meant something specific to him. Then she asked what he was reading. Ji-hoon stopped, not visibly. To anyone across the room, he was still standing in the same position. But something shifted behind his eyes, the small adjustment of a person who has been asked something they were not prepared for. Nobody had asked him that in a very long time. He told her. She had read half of it and disagreed with the central argument. They talked for 23 minutes without either of them checking a phone. What Nadia didn't know, walking to the elevator at 10:41 that night, was that the man she had defended had quietly declined 3 meeting requests from Blackstone and Callaway over the previous 18 months because of the way Victor Callaway had spoken to his assistant on the phone. She didn't know that. She was thinking about the book. 2 months is long enough to know whether you like someone. It is not long enough to know what knowing them will cost you. Nadia learned this on a Thursday afternoon in October, sitting across from her senior partner in a conference room that had no windows and too much recycled air. But that came later. Before the conference room, there were 2 months of something she hadn't expected, which was that being with Ji-hoon Kwan was, against all evidence provided by the world around her, uncomplicated. He took the red line with her on Tuesday mornings. He ordered the $11 pork rice bowl at the place on 18th Street without looking at the menu, because she had ordered it the first time and he had liked it. He didn't check his phone when they were at the same table. That last thing, that specific, ordinary thing, turned out to matter more to her than she would have predicted. She had been with men who made her feel like a pause between more important things. Ji-hoon made her feel like the point. She didn't tell him that, but she thought it. The pressure arrived from 3 directions at once, the way pressure usually does. Not as one large force, but as 3 smaller ones, each arriving at a slightly different angle, each making the others harder to dismiss. Marcus came first. He found them at the coffee shop on Dearborn Street on a Saturday morning. Found them, Nadia noted, with the specific ease of someone who had not stumbled in accidentally. He sat down without being invited, ordered an Americano with the relaxed certainty of a man who expected to be accommodated, and turned to Ji-hoon with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. What kind of work did you say you were in? Ji-hoon looked at him without urgency. Financial consulting. Independent? Yes. What kind of funds? What's your typical deal sizes? Marcus leaned back, comfortable, almost generous in his interest. I asked because I might know some people. Always good to make connections. The questions were structured. Nadia recognized the architecture of them, the way each one built toward an answer that would publicly establish a ceiling. What's your AUM? What's your track record? What's the largest transaction you've closed? The point was not the answers. The point was watching Ji-hoon not be able to answer them at the level Marcus expected. Ji-hoon answered each question, briefly, calmly, without providing numbers that would have ended the conversation immediately. Marcus left 20 minutes later with the particular satisfaction of a man who believed he had just confirmed something. Outside on Dearborn, the wind off the lake was cold enough to mean it. Ji-hoon buttoned his coat without visible frustration. He always like that, he asked. Worse, usually, Nadia said. Ji-hoon nodded once, didn't elaborate. She watched him file it away in whatever system he used for things that weren't worth his energy today but might be relevant later. There was something in the efficiency of it, the complete absence of wounded pride, that made her trust him slightly more than she had that morning. The second thing was subtler, and therefore more effective. It came 1 week later, at a Sunday brunch she attended without Ji-hoon, a loose gathering of people from adjacent professional circles, the kind of event where everyone was networking without admitting that was what they were doing. Olivia Stratton found her at the coffee station with the timing of someone who had been waiting for her to be alone. Nadia. Warm, familiar, despite the fact that they had met exactly twice. Can I just say, I think it's lovely that you've found someone. I really do. Nadia waited. I only bring this up because I genuinely like you. Olivia lowered her voice to the register of a confidence. I was involved with Ji-hoon briefly about 2 years ago. And I want you to know, the version of him that you're seeing right now, the understated thing, the simplicity, that's a performance. I learned that the hard way. She smiled with something that had been carefully arranged to look like concern. He lets women pay for things. I didn't understand why at first. Now I do. He prefers it that way. She touched Nadia's arm once lightly. Just be careful. That's all. Nadia drove home and sat with it for 2 hours. The accusation was specific enough to sound researched. The delivery had been warm enough to sound like friendship. She knew the architecture of manipulation well enough to recognize it here. But knowing a thing is constructed doesn't make it weightless. She asked Ji-hoon that evening, directly, without softening the question. He didn't flinch. Olivia offered to pay for things because she wanted me to owe her something. I declined, repeatedly. He looked at her steadily. She didn't like being declined. Nadia was quiet for a moment. Why does she say it the other way around? Because her version makes her the victim, he said. It's a more comfortable story. She believed him. She also made note, privately to herself, that a man who could explain someone else's dishonesty without becoming dishonest himself was a man worth paying attention to. The third thing arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a conference room with no windows. Victor Calloway closed the door behind them, which he didn't usually bother doing for associate check-ins. He sat down. He folded his hands. He spoke with the deliberate calm of someone who had rehearsed the register of this conversation. We're building a shortlist for senior associate. I want you to know your name is on it. You've earned that. He paused long enough for the weight of it to settle. What I also want you to know is that we're a relationship business. The people we put forward represent the firm, outside the office as much as in it. Another pause. I say that as someone who wants to see you succeed here. He didn't say, end the relationship. He didn't have to. The sentence was already in the room. Nadia drove home and sat with $847 in credit card debt, a number she knew with the precision of someone who checked it the way other people check the weather. She sat with it for a long time. She thought about the senior associate position, what it meant financially, what it would mean for the next 5 years, what it would mean for her mother, who had asked once and only once whether the firm was treating her right. She looked at her phone for a while without picking it up. The next morning, she walked into Blackstone and Calloway at 8:49 a.m., went directly to Victor Calloway's office, and said what she had decided in the elevator on the way up. My personal life is not within the scope of your authority. Calm, even. Looking at him the way she had looked at him 11 months ago when she was a first year and he had mispronounced her name 3 times in one meeting, and she had corrected him each time. I wanted to be clear about that. Victor held her gaze for a moment, then he nodded, slowly. Noted. She went to her desk. She opened her laptop. She did not call Ji-hoon. In the elevator that afternoon, catching her reflection in the brushed steel doors, she didn't look like someone who had won anything. She looked like someone who had paid for something and decided the price was right. She didn't know what that choice had already set in motion. She didn't know that Ji-hoon had a source in the building, not placed there deliberately, not for this purpose, but existing nonetheless, the way certain information always finds certain people in a city that is smaller than it looks. She didn't know he already knew about the conference room, and she didn't know what he was about to do with that information, or how much it was going to cost both of them before they found the other side of it. Ji-hoon made the call on a Wednesday evening at 9:11 p.m., standing at the window of the apartment he rented on the 4th floor of a building in Lincoln Park that nobody connected to his name. He had stood there for 40 minutes before picking up the phone. He knew what he was doing was wrong. Not illegal. Not unkind, exactly. Just wrong in the specific way that certain protective instincts are wrong. The kind that arrive dressed as love and turn out to be control. He knew this about himself. He had learned it the hard way from his father, who had spent 30 years making decisions for people he loved and calling it loyalty. Ji-hoon had promised himself he would not be that man. He picked up the phone anyway. He didn't threaten Victor Calloway. He didn't need to. He simply made a call from a number Victor's assistant would not recognize, gave his name quietly and completely for the first time, and said 3 sentences. The first established who he was. The second established that he was aware of the Thursday conference room conversation. The third was a question. Whether Victor had considered the implications of creating a hostile environment for associates who had done nothing but their jobs. He hung up before Victor could respond. Victor spent the rest of that evening in the particular silence of a man who has just understood something very large, very late. Ji-hoon put the phone down and stood at the window for a long time, looking at Lincoln Park in the dark. He thought about his father. He thought about the specific way power makes cowards of careful people, how you spend years building restraint, and then one phone call undoes the architecture of it. He thought about Nadia, who had walked into Victor's office and said what she needed to say without asking anyone's permission. He had taken that from her. Not the words, she'd already said them, but the weight of them. The clean, unassisted weight of a decision made entirely alone. He had reduced it. He didn't sleep well that night. Hyun Jae-kwon arrived in Chicago on a Tuesday, which Nadia would later note was the only day of the week when she reliably left her building at the same time. Ji-hoon had not told his mother this. His mother had asked him once, casually, what Nadia's schedule looked like. He had said Tuesdays were consistent. He had not asked why she wanted to know. With his mother, certain questions were better left unasked, not because she was dishonest, but because she operated in a register of intention that explaining would only diminish. Hyunja had been conducting these assessments her entire adult life. Not of romantic partners specifically, of people. The way a person treats a stranger with nothing to offer is, in her view, the only reliable data point available. Everything else, how someone behaves at a dinner table, how they speak to a boss, how they present themselves at a first meeting, is performance. Performance is information, but it is not truth. The rain that Tuesday was the kind Chicago does in October. Not heavy enough to be dramatic, just persistent enough to make everything slightly worse. Hyunja dressed carefully for the role. The brown Coles coat she kept specifically for travel, the walking shoes that had genuinely been resoled twice, the canvas bag in faded green that had held groceries on 4 continents. She positioned herself on the sidewalk in front of Nadia's building at 7:39 a.m. At 7:43, she let the bag go. The eggs went first. 6 of them, 3 surviving. The apples rolled with the particular efficiency of round things on wet concrete, finding the puddle immediately, as though the puddle had been waiting. The celery landed under the rear tire of a bicycle locked to the signpost, the pale green of it vivid against the gray of the sidewalk. Hyunja stood with her hands at her sides and did not call out. She had done this before in variations. A dropped wallet in Los Angeles, a struggling stroller on a San Francisco escalator, a confused elderly man with wrong directions outside a Chicago courthouse 12 years ago, which was how she had first understood that this city had good people in it, unevenly distributed and worth finding. She knew exactly what a person's first 2 seconds looked like when they were calculating whether to stop. Nadia's first 2 seconds looked like someone who already knew she was going to stop and was just confirming the logistics. She crouched down without hesitation. She picked up the eggs that had survived, 1, 2, 3, and placed them back in the carton with a care that struck Hyunja as specific, not performative care, the care of someone who understood that what was salvageable was worth salvaging, and what wasn't didn't need to be mourned. She wiped the apples on the sleeve of her coat. Her good coat, Hyunja noted. She held the umbrella over both of them without being asked. "Come inside," Nadia said. "Wait until it lets up." The apartment was the 3rd floor of a 2-flat clean in the way that small spaces become clean when the person living in them has learned to be precise. A bookshelf too full for its frame. A kitchen that smelled faintly of coffee from the morning. 2 plants on the windowsill that were alive, which Hyunja considered a reliable indicator of something, though she had never been able to articulate exactly what. Nadia made tea without asking what kind. She put a plate of crackers on the table that had clearly come from a cabinet she had opened and assessed in about 4 seconds. She sat across from Hyunja and did not check her phone. They talked for 31 minutes. Hyunja spoke about Seoul in the 1980s, the particular cold of it, the way the city smelled in winter, the small shop where her mother had bought persimmons every November. She spoke about learning English from American cartoons, about a word she had mispronounced for 11 years, before a kind colleague corrected her without embarrassment. She mentioned her son, briefly, without his name, a boy who worked in business, very busy, who called on Sundays when he remembered. Nadia listened. Not the polite listening of someone enduring a conversation, the actual kind where the body is still and the eyes don't drift and the response comes from what was just said rather than from what the listener was already planning to say. When the rain began to ease, Nadia called a lift. She walked Hyunja to the door. Then she went back inside and came out with 2 folded bills, 100 and another 100, and held them out. "In case you need a cab," she said, "or anything." Hyunja looked at the money. She knew, because Ji-hoon had mentioned it in the way people mention things they are not making a point of, that Nadia carried credit card debt. She knew the number. "It's too much," Hyunja said. "Please," Nadia said. She said it the way people say please when they mean it, not as a formality. as an actual request. Hyanja took the money. The lift moved north through Pilsen in the thin October light. Hyanja watched Nadia's building until she couldn't see it anymore. Then she looked at the two bills in her hand for a long time. A woman who was carrying 1,847 cents in debt had folded these carefully and come back out in the rain to press them into the hands of a stranger. Not for recognition. There was no one there to see it. Not for reciprocity. She didn't know Hyunja's name, just because the stranger might need them. Hyunja held the phone for a long time before she dialed. When Ji-hoon answered on the second ring, she didn't explain the morning. She didn't describe the apartment or the tea or the careful way the eggs had been placed back in their carton. She said 4 words. You found her, she's the one. Nadia arrived at the office 23 minutes late. She gave no explanation at the front desk. Victor looked at her once across the open floor with an expression she couldn't read. Not the usual assessment, something quieter. Something that looked, if she had known to look for it, almost like recalibration. She didn't know about the call. She wouldn't know for 11 more days. What she knew, sitting down at her desk and opening her laptop and beginning the ordinary machinery of a Tuesday, was that she had given a stranger $200 in the rain and felt, on the walk back upstairs, something she couldn't name exactly. Lighter, perhaps, or more precisely like herself. She didn't examine it further. She had work to do. But the feeling stayed with her all day. Quiet and persistent, like good weather you forget to notice until it's gone. The Hawthorne Room at Hotel Meridian Grand held 400 people comfortably and 600 if the fire marshal wasn't paying attention. On the third Friday of October, it held exactly 387, arranged around tables dressed in white linen, with a temporary stage at the north end and 2 open bars that had been busy since 6:30. The event was billed as a business acquisition announcement, the kind of gathering that required no further description for the people invited, because the people invited already knew what it meant to be in a room where a transaction of this size was being made public. The Meridian Grand chain, 14 hotels across 8 cities, a real estate portfolio valued at $612 million. The buyer had been anonymous until tonight. That was in itself a statement. Danielle had called Nadia at 4 in the afternoon. You need to leave the apartment tonight. I have a brief due Monday. The brief will still be due Monday at midnight. Come. 2 hours, I'll drive. Nadia went because Danielle had been asking her for 3 weeks, and because she had learned, over 11 years of friendship, that Danielle's judgment about when she needed to be somewhere was more reliable than her own. She wore the black dress she kept for occasions she hadn't anticipated. She did not tell Ji-hoon she was going. He had a meeting he'd mentioned briefly, details he didn't elaborate on, in the way he sometimes didn't elaborate on things, and she had learned not to pull at those threads until he offered them. She did not know the meeting and the event were the same room. The first hour was unremarkable in the way that events like this are unremarkable. The same conversations in different configurations. The careful positioning of people who understood that proximity to the right names was its own form of currency. Nadia stayed near Danielle, accepted a glass of wine she mostly held, and watched the room with the observational habit she had developed over 3 years of attending events where she was always, in one way or another, taking notes. Marcus arrived at 7:15 and made his way to the center of the room, with the ease of a man who had decided the center was where he belonged. He was representing a fund looking to participate in the deal on the financing side, a position that had required, over the past 6 weeks, a series of maneuvers that Ji-hoon's due diligence team had been quietly documenting. Victor arrived at 7:20 with 2 other partners and moved immediately toward the bar, which put him on the west side of the room, which put Nadia on the opposite side, which suited both of them. Olivia Stratton arrived at 7:32 in something ivory and architectural and found Nadia at the edge of the cocktail area at 7:49, timing that had the precision of someone who had located her earlier and waited for the right moment. Nadia. Warm. The same warmth as the brunch, calibrated to the same frequency. She moved to stand beside her rather than across from her, a positioning that made what followed feel like confidence rather than confrontation. She spoke at a volume that carried, I genuinely hope things are going well for you. I mean that. She let a small pause develop. I saw you came alone tonight and I thought, I hope she's doing okay. Because after everything I told you, if you're still in a situation, I worry. The ivory of her dress caught the light. 15 people within range had adjusted their attention without appearing to do so. He doesn't have anything, Nadia. I don't mean that unkindly. I just mean, a woman like you shouldn't be carrying someone who can't carry himself. The room around them did what rooms do when something worth listening to is happening. It continued its existing noise while quietly redirecting its attention. Nadia held her wine glass. She had been in this moment before, Not this specific moment, but its architecture. The public diminishment delivered in the language of concern. The implication that her choices required outside correction. She had learned over 31 years that there were two kinds of responses available: the one that defended, which gave the attack its desired significance, and the one that simply declined to participate. She looked at Olivia with the calm of someone who had already decided. "Thank you for your concern," she said. Then she turned back toward the stage where the lights had begun to shift. Victor, from across the room, had watched the exchange without intervening. Marcus, who had seen it too, offered a small nod in Olivia's direction, the brief solidarity of people who have decided they are on the same side of something. The ceremony was efficient. The CEO of Meridian Grand, a compact, silver-haired man named Hartwell who spoke without notes, spent 4 minutes on the significance of the transaction and the strength of the acquiring party before arriving at the sentence everyone had come to hear. "I'd like to introduce the founder of Kwan Capital and the new principal owner of the Meridian Grand chain, Mr. Ji-hoon Kwan." He came from the back of the room. Not from the stage, not from behind the curtain, from the rear door on the east side, which meant he had been in the room for some portion of the evening, moving through it with the particular invisibility of someone who knew how to be in a place without announcing himself. He passed within 4 feet of where Nadia was standing. She saw him before she understood what she was seeing. 4 seconds. 4 seconds in a room of 387 people in which no one produced a sound. The air conditioning continued, the candles continued, everything else stopped. Nadia looked at Ji-hoon at the podium, then at the room, then back at Ji-hoon. He was not looking at the audience. He was looking at her. He spoke for 6 minutes. Thank you to Hartwell. Brief remarks on the acquisition, something about the staff of the Meridian properties that was specific enough to have required actual knowledge of them. He was composed in the way of someone for whom composure had never been a performance. When he stepped back from the podium, Seo Yeon Park, who had been standing at the periphery of the room in a way that retrospectively made complete sense, moved to the table where Victor Calloway was sitting. She placed a folder in front of him. Thin, manila. She said nothing. Victor opened it. Inside was a single printed page, an email 18 months old, sent from his assistant's account at his direction, declining a meeting request from a representative of Kwan Capital. The language of the decline was efficient. "Mr. Calloway doesn't take meetings with firms he isn't familiar with. Please reach out again when you have an established track record." The name of the firm was in the header. Victor read it twice, the second time more slowly. When he looked up, Ji-hoon was across the room, and their eyes met for approximately 3 seconds, and Ji-hoon did not smile or nod or offer any expression that could be characterized as triumph. He simply looked. Then he looked away. Marcus understood what the due diligence report on his fund would mean before the evening was over. The document had been filed with the relevant parties that afternoon, timed with a precision that had nothing accidental about it. The risk exposure he had hidden from his investors was now in writing, attributed correctly, and beyond his ability to manage. Olivia understood. Looking at the room rearranging itself around Ji-hoon, watching the CEO of Meridian Grand defer to him with the body language of genuine respect, that she had stood 40 minutes ago in this same room and told $200 worth of strangers that he had nothing. The ivory dress suddenly felt like the wrong choice. Ji-hoon crossed the room to Nadia. He didn't stop to speak to anyone, didn't acknowledge the people who had turned toward him with the recalibrated attention of those who had just revised their understanding of a situation. He moved through the room the way he had moved through the Worthington Club 2 months ago, as though the room's opinion of his direction was not a factor he was tracking. He stopped in front of her. She looked at him for a moment. He waited, the specific waiting of someone who understood they were owed a reaction and was prepared to accept whatever form it took. "The Meridian Grand," she said, not a question. "Yes." She was quiet. Not the silence of someone processing shock. She had been doing that for 90 seconds already. The silence of someone deciding what to do with clarity after a period of useful uncertainty. "You said you wanted to tell me about your mother," she said. "Yes, and you said you needed to apologize for something." He didn't look away. "Victor, I called him. I shouldn't have." 3 seconds. She held his gaze through all three of them. Then she placed her hand in his, not dramatically, not with the ceremony the room might have expected, just the quiet, deliberate gesture of a person who has made a decision and is acting on it. "Then let's start with the apology," she said. "And then tell me about your mother." What? She didn't know yet. Standing in the Hawthorne room with the city invisible beyond the curtained windows and the room slowly relearning how to generate noise around them, was that the woman in the story he was about to tell her was the same woman who had sat in her kitchen 11 days ago and asked for nothing. She would know in about 20 minutes. And the knowing of it would be, in its own quiet way, the most important moment of everything that came after. They sat in his car for 2 hours, not the car anyone in that room would have associated with the name Quan Capital, a 4-year-old Volvo charcoal gray, with a cracked phone mount on the dashboard that he had never gotten around to replacing. The hotel's valet had retrieved it without visible reaction, which said something about either the valet's professionalism or Ji-hoon's ability to be consistently surprising. Nadia sat in the passenger seat with her heels off and her feet on the dashboard, which she had done without asking permission. He hadn't said anything about it. She took that as a good sign. He started with Claire, not with the money, not with Quan Capital, not with the explanation of how a man whose name appeared on no public document controlled $4.7 billion in assets under management. He started with a girl he had known since the second year of college, when neither of them had anything, when they had studied in the same library, Carol, for 3 semesters, and built the kind of friendship that precedes love so naturally that the transition is invisible until it has already happened. Claire Huang had left 2 years after the money became real. She said she didn't want to live in that world, he said. He was looking at the steering wheel. Not because she needed more, because she needed less. She said the version of me that existed in that world wasn't the version she had fallen in love with. He paused. I don't know if she was right. I've thought about it for 4 years and I still don't know. Nadia listened without filling the silence. After that, I didn't know what the right test was, he said. Whether someone stays when you have nothing, or whether someone stays when you have everything. Claire stayed for nothing and left for everything. So the test I understood stopped working. So you removed the variable, Nadia said. He looked at her. You made yourself look like nothing, she said, to see what was left. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, she looked at the cracked phone mount. That's a very lonely way to live. It was, he said. And the tense of it, past, not present, landed between them with the weight of a specific acknowledgement. Then he told her about his mother. He told it without softening the structure of it, that Hyunja had come to Chicago specifically for this purpose, that the dropped bag was deliberate, that the 31 minutes in Nadia's kitchen had been an assessment conducted with the care and intention of someone who had been thinking about it for a long time. Nadia was quiet for longer this time. He waited. He had promised himself, in the parking garage before the valet brought the car, that he would not explain or justify the test beyond stating it plainly. She was entitled to her reaction without his interference. The brown coat, she said finally. She's had it for years. The walking shoes. Resoled twice. Nadia looked out the window at the Chicago street. Ordinary at this hour, a bus going past. 2 people walking a dog, the city doing what it does without regard for the significant things happening inside parked cars. I almost didn't stop, she said. I was doing the math on the train schedule. I know, he said. She told me. She watched me do the math. Yes. Nadia turned this over, not with resentment, he could see the difference. With the particular attention of someone locating themselves inside a story they are still in the middle of. And then I stopped, she said. And then you stopped. Not because of anything. Just because she was standing there. I know. She was quiet again. When she spoke, it was to the window, not to him. That's the thing about those moments, she said. You don't make a decision. You just find out what you already are. He didn't say anything. After a moment, she turned back. You called Victor. Yes, without telling me. Yes, I had already handled it. I know, he said. I knew that when I was doing it. I did it anyway. He looked at her directly. I took the weight off a decision you made yourself. I had no right to do that. She held his gaze for a long time. He didn't look away and didn't try to fill the space with more words. She had noticed he did this. Let silences be what they were instead of rushing to end them. It was, she had decided, one of the truest things about him. Don't do it again, she said. I won't. I mean it. I know you do, he said. That's the only reason it means something when I say I won't. Breakfast at Hyunja's was at 7:15 on a Sunday, 3 weeks later, in the kitchen of a house in the Koreatown neighborhood of Los Angeles that smelled like sesame oil and something slow-cooked in the particular warmth of a home that has been lived in for a long time. Hyunja did not apologize for the test. Nadia had not expected her to. There are certain women of a certain generation for whom an apology would be a reduction of the thing itself, as though the care that designed it needed to be walked back rather than acknowledged. Nadia understood this. She had a grandmother who operated on similar principles. They sat at the kitchen table. Ji-hoon had been assigned to make toast, which he was doing with the focused attention of a man completing a task he had been given and did not intend to fail. Hyunja placed the first bowl of juk in front of Nadia. Nadia didn't know the significance of the gesture, the specific cultural weight of the first bowl, what it communicated in a Korean household about belonging and welcome, and the quiet formality of acceptance. She just saw an elderly woman placing a bowl of warm food in front of her with both hands. She accepted it with both hands. "Thank you, Mrs. Kwan," she said. "It smells wonderful." Hyunja looked at her son. He was looking at the toast. She nodded once. Slowly. The way a person nods when something they have been waiting for has finally simply arrived. The consequences settled in over the 3 weeks that followed, the way consequences do when they have been accurately aimed. Not dramatically, but completely. Victor Callaway received formal notice that Kwan Capital would not be renewing its advisory relationship with Blackstone and Callaway, an $8.3 million annual contract that 3 partners had spent 2 years cultivating without knowing who they were cultivating it for. The firm's HR department received 3 separate complaints from associates in the same 2-week period. Victor did not lose his position immediately, but the room he occupied in that building became measurably smaller. Nadia received 2 unsolicited offers from competing firms within 6 days, salary increases of 47% and 51% respectively. She accepted neither immediately. She had started thinking about something else. Marcus Ellis's fund faced an investor inquiry that had been initiated by a due diligence report filed the Friday evening of the Meridian Grand event, the same evening he had watched Ji-hoon cross a room toward Nadia and understood, in real time, the dimensions of his miscalculation. The inquiry was ongoing. The $23.4 million deal he had been constructing did not survive the month. Olivia Stratton received a 1-paragraph email from Kwan Capital Foundation declining her firm's partnership application. The email was polite. It offered no explanation. There are communications that say everything by saying nothing, and she understood this one immediately. 6 months later, Nadia Washington opened a law office on the 7th floor of a building in West Loop that had good light and reasonable rent, and a view of the city that she had decided was worth the extra $200 a month. Ji-hoon had not opened it for her. He had introduced her over the course of 3 months to 4 people who needed exactly the kind of legal work she did best. The kind of introduction that requires knowing both parties well enough to understand the fit and trusting both parties enough to make it. What she did with those introductions was entirely her own. The office had 2 rooms, a bookshelf she had moved from Pilsen, and the 2 plants from the windowsill that had survived, which she considered a reliable indicator of something she still couldn't articulate exactly, but intended to maintain. On a Thursday evening in March, Ji-hoon came by after a meeting that had run late. He let himself in with the key she had given him, which he used with the specific care of someone who understood that being given access to a person's space is not the same as having a right to it. He stopped in the doorway to the inner office. Nadia was at her desk, reading a document, one hand holding a pen she wasn't using, the desk lamp making a warm circle of light in the room. She hadn't heard him come in. She was entirely herself. No performance, no awareness of an audience. Just a woman working in her own office at the end of a Thursday in a city she had chosen, in a life she had built. He stood in the doorway and did not announce himself. He thought about his father, who had confused love with ownership for 30 years and called the confusion loyalty. He thought about Claire, who had been right about some things and wrong about others, and whose leaving had broken something in him that had taken a long time to reassemble. He thought about a Tuesday morning in Pilsen, a bag of groceries on a wet sidewalk, and a woman doing the math on a train schedule before choosing the right thing anyway. He thought about the specific kind of trust it takes to give someone your kitchen for 31 minutes when you don't know their name. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. Nadia looked up. There was nothing extraordinary about what followed. She asked if he had eaten. He said no. She said there was leftover soup from the place on Monroe that he liked. He came in and sat down. She went back to her document. He read something on his phone. The city continued outside the windows, indifferent and enormous and full of people trying to figure out the same things. 2 ordinary people in a room at the end of a Thursday. It was enough. It was in the way that only simple things can be. Exactly enough. Nobody announced the lesson. It didn't need announcing. Dignity doesn't require an audience. It doesn't require validation, or a room full of people who finally understand, or a moment of public recognition to make it real. It requires only the private decision made in the small moments that no one is watching. The math on the train schedule, the turn toward the door, the $200 in the rain. Those moments don't ask to be seen, but they are always exactly who you are. If you're still here, thank you, not for watching. For staying with a story about something that doesn't always make the news, the quiet kind of courage, the kind that happens on a sidewalk at 7:43 in the morning when nobody's keeping score. We want to know what stayed with you. Was it Nadia in the elevator, choosing a door she knew was closing? Was it Ji-hoon standing in the doorway, not announcing himself, just watching the person he loved be exactly who she was? Or was it Hyunja, in the back of a lift, holding $200 that didn't belong to her and understanding everything she needed to understand. Drop a comment and tell us. Tell us where you're watching from, what time it is where you are, and the one moment in this story that hit you somewhere you weren't expecting. We read every comment. We mean that. If this story reminded you of someone, a person who showed up quietly, who chose right when no one was watching, who never needed the room to know they had arrived, tell us about them. This space is for those people. Hit the like button if you stayed all the way through. Subscribe if you want more stories that take their time and mean what they say. The notification bell is there for the ones you don't want to miss. We'll be here. Take care of each other out there.
That's the end of today's story here on Treble Mafia Stories. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. It genuinely means a lot. Now I have to ask, are you team him or team her? Drop it in the comments. I want to see which side wins. If this story kept you hooked, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss the next one. See you soon.